I'm Margaret Ellison, 75 years old, retired after nearly 4 decades teaching algebra and geometry in Phoenix City High. I live alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment above a small bookstore. And 3 nights ago, my only son Neil rang the doorbell with his wife and a bag of takeout. Like it was any ordinary visit, they said they had exciting news, asked for a signature on some papers, said it was just technical when they left. I opened the envelope he'd handed me and froze. My name was on a receipt for $50,000 listed as a down payment on a house I had never seen before. I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to question the intentions of someone you thought you knew. I wasn't always suspicious, not when I was younger and life still felt like a straight line from point A to point B. I grew up in a quiet town in Alabama, raised by parents who believed in discipline, grace, and hard work. My mother worked at the church, and my father ran a watch repair shop out of our front porch. I learned early how to sew a hem, fix a clock balance, a checkbook, and keep my voice steady, even when my heart was breaking. I moved to Phoenix City in 1972 after finishing my degree in mathematics. I took a job at the high school and never left. Not until arthritis made the chalk feel like gravel in my fingers 35 years in the same classroom. Rows of restless kids' fractions and functions. And that sweet moment when someone who'd been lost finally understood the pattern my students kept me going. Some of them still visit once in a while, and they're the reason I don't feel invisible. Even now. My son Neil was born late in my marriage. I was already 37 when he came into the world. And by the time his father passed suddenly of a heart attack, it was just me and Neil. I raised him the best I could on a teacher's salary. No frills, but never lacking. We didn't travel far or dine out much, but he had clean clothes, violin lessons, summer camps, a decent bike by junior high. I worked extra hours, tutoring in the evenings, just so he wouldn't have to feel the difference between us and the other families. He was a bright boy, but restless, impatient, always looking for shortcuts while I was laying the foundation. Brick by brick, he wanted to skip to the rooftop by the time he hit college. He told me straight out, "It's not for me. Mom, I want to make money now," and that was that. He left after 2 years, got a job at Phoenix Financial, and worked his way up to loan officer. I told myself he was doing well, that maybe the job would teach him responsibility. I met his wife Talia a few years back. She worked retail, part-time, and always seemed to look past me like I was part of the furniture. She never called me Mom. Just Ruth, like I was some distant neighbor, not family. They didn't visit often, only when they needed something like help with taxes or a co-signature for a small loan. Nothing too unusual at first, so when they rang that evening and brought dinner, I set the table and listened quietly. They smiled, too much, spoke in generalities, something about starting fresh and big changes. I noticed the new watch on Neil's wrist, the necklace Talia wore. Neither of them mentioned where the money came from or why they suddenly seemed so relaxed. Then came the envelope. "Just your insurance confirmation," he said with a grin when they left. I opened it, expecting the usual printed form. Instead, it was a receipt with my name printed across the top, a $50,000 down payment to a development company I'd never heard of, in a neighborhood I couldn't afford, even in my prime. I sat in my chair and looked around the apartment at the worn furniture and books stacked neatly by the fireplace. The kind of place that holds memories, not value. My mind circled the same questions again and again. How could this be a mistake? My name, my social security number, the address, all correct? And if it wasn't a mistake, then what had my son done? The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a cup of coffee trying to write down everything I knew. My handwriting had stiffened over the years, but the habit of organizing problems on paper never left me. Across the top of the page, I wrote 3 words, receipt conversation signature. I underlined them, then stared at them for a long while. The more I thought about it, the more things began to click into place. The call Neil had taken in the hallway, the odd way Talia had smiled that night, the flowers that arrived the next day with a note saying they had a surprise for me. It didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a warning. After breakfast, I called Mabel, an old friend who taught history at Phoenix City High for years. She didn't ask too many questions when I said I needed the number of a lawyer, just told me her nephew specialized in financial matters and gave me his contact information. I promised to keep her updated and hung up. Then I opened my file cabinet and started digging through old bank statements. Nothing unusual, just my pension deposits, utility payments, small grocery transactions. But there was no trace of $50,000 being withdrawn, not by me. Around 2 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. A delivery man stood outside holding a bouquet of lilies and roses. "Ruth Ellison?" he asked. "Yes, that's me." "Sign here, please." I signed the slip and took the flowers inside. The card tucked between the stems read, "Thank you for everything. We have a surprise for you soon. Love, Neil and Talia." I set the bouquet in a vase on the kitchen table, but it did nothing to brighten the room. That evening, I called Neil. "Thank you for the flowers," I said. "They're beautiful." "You're welcome, Mom. You deserve the best," he replied too quickly. "There's something I wanted to ask you about. The envelope you gave me, it wasn't insurance. It was a receipt for a real estate down payment. In my name." There was a pause. "Oh, that. I must have given you the wrong one. Just toss it, okay, it's from work. But it has my name, my social, Neil, my address. It's nothing. I'll take care of it." "Don't worry." His voice sounded tight. "I've got to run, but I'll call you tomorrow, all right?" He hung up before I could say another word. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept turning over the same thought in my head. How far could this have gone? I remembered when Neil was 12 and took my credit card to buy a pair of sneakers. I found out when the bill came in. We had a long talk about honesty. I thought he learned his lesson. Maybe I was wrong. The next morning, I called another former student, Terry Niblock. He'd been in my geometry class years ago. I remembered him clearly, always turned in his work early, always wrote his numbers too small. Last I heard, he worked at the same bank as Neil. I made a note to call him after 10. Before I could dial, the phone rang again. A familiar voice greeted me. "Mrs. Ellison, it's Faye Wyndham. Remember me? 3rd row, 2nd seat by the window?" I said without thinking. "You always wore butterfly clips." She laughed. "I can't believe you remember that." Faye worked for the IRS now. She said she'd be nearby and wanted to treat me to lunch. We met at a little cafe 2 blocks from my apartment. She looked more polished, now her hair, shorter glasses instead of contacts. But the kindness in her eyes was still the same. Over sandwiches and coffee, I told her what had happened. The receipt, the phone call, the flowers. Faye didn't interrupt. She just listened. "Do you think he used your identity for a loan?" she asked quietly when I finished. "I don't want to believe it," I said, "but everything points that way." Faye pulled a pen and pad from her bag. She scribbled a name and number. "This is someone I know at the credit bureau. You can request your credit report as a consumer. It's your right. And off the record, I can check if any new properties have been registered under your name." "Thank you," I said. "I just want to know what I'm dealing with." Later that night, the phone rang again. Ruth Faye said, "There's a mortgage loan in your name. $450,000. Phoenix Financial. 3 weeks old. First payment already made $50,000. I stood there holding the phone against my ear. It was like hearing your own name spoken in a language you didn't understand. "I see," I said, finally. "Thank you for telling me. What are you going to do?" "Talk to the bank. Maybe it's a mistake." But we both knew it wasn't. The next morning, I put on my best suit and went down to Phoenix Financial. The receptionist offered to call Neil for me, but I declined. "Actually, I'd rather speak to someone else. I'd like a second opinion." She led me to a man named Terry. "Mrs. Ellison?" he asked, reaching out his hand. "Terry Niblock." I looked at him. Same careful eyes, same soft voice. "You were in my class," I said. He smiled. "You gave me a second chance after I failed that algebra exam." He led me into his office and closed the door. "I need information," I told him, "about a mortgage loan, $450,000, in my name, but I never signed a thing." His smile faded. "That loan went through 3 weeks ago," he said quietly. "Neil was the officer who filed it." "I didn't sign anything, Terry." He hesitated, then pulled a folder from his drawer and laid it on the desk. "You didn't get this from me," he said. "You've got 10 minutes before my next meeting." I opened the folder. The paperwork was all there. My name, my address. A signature that looked like mine, but it wasn't. The T's weren't crossed the way I crossed them. The final flourish at the end was missing. "This isn't mine," I said, pointing. "I can prove it." Terry looked at it closely, then nodded. "I believe you." I leaned in. "What was the loan for?" He flipped through the pages and pointed to a property deed. "A new build. 26 Oak Ridge, West Heights. High-end neighborhood." I wrote the address in my notebook. "And when's the move-in?" "The keys were handed over last week," he said. "Technically, the house is ready." I closed the folder and exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Terry. Truly." As he walked me out, he said, "You taught me something, Mrs. Ellison. You used to say, 'Numbers don't lie,' and people shouldn't either." I never forgot that. I nodded. Neither did I. That night, I packed a bag with a notebook, a pen, my camera, and the receipt Neil had left behind. At 5:30 the next morning, I called a cab and gave the driver the address on Oak Ridge. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, but didn't say a word. I looked out at the neighborhoods, passing by small brick homes giving way to polished stone and winding drives. When we pulled up to the house, it was just as I'd imagined. Big windows, manicured hedges, a 2-story modern home that looked nothing like the world I came from. I tipped the driver and walked slowly to the front door. A cleaning van sat in the driveway. The front door was cracked open. I knocked once, then again louder. No one answered. I stepped inside. The foyer smelled like fresh paint and expensive soap. Marble floors stretched beneath my feet. On one side was a living room with furniture still wrapped in plastic. On the other, a dining table long enough to seat 12. I climbed the stairs and opened a door at the end of the hallway. An office, clean and spare. On the desk was a stack of folders. I opened the first one and started to read, and with every turn of the page, the picture became clearer. The office smelled like fresh varnish. The desk was empty except for 3 thick folders stacked neatly beside a brand new computer. I closed the door behind me and sat down in the leather chair, feeling the weight of the moment settle around me. The first folder held the house deed insurance policy and closing paperwork. Every page had my name across the top. Every signature claimed to be mine. But it wasn't. The handwriting was close, but the slant was wrong, and the final loop of the signature had a hesitation I never had. I opened the second folder. It was from the bank loan documents, amortization schedules, disbursement records. $450,000. 30 years. Monthly payments that would have eaten through my pension before the groceries were even covered. There were dates, initials, notary stamps, all clean, all legal on paper. The third folder was worse. Inside were copies of my personal identification, my driver's license, social security card, health insurance, 6 months of my bank statements printed out and neatly clipped. I didn't know when Neil had gotten these, maybe the last time he'd asked to help me organize paperwork. Maybe he'd gone through my desk when I was out at the grocery store. I couldn't remember. And now it didn't matter. I took out the small camera I'd brought with me and started taking pictures of everything. Each page, each forged line. I didn't rush. I made sure every image was clear. When I was finished, I returned the folders to their place and looked around the room once more before opening the door. The hallway was still quiet. I stepped out and made my way down to the master bedroom. The door was slightly open. Inside, a bed with a carved headboard sat under large windows that overlooked a trimmed backyard. A walk-in closet stood to the left, half full of clothes, dresses, and bags in Talia's style. Bright expensive, all with tags still attached. The bathroom had double sinks and marble tile with a built-in soaking tub that looked like it had never been used. Every surface gleamed. Not one thing belonged to me. I checked the time. Just after 11. The cleaners had left and there were no cars in the driveway. I had time. I moved through the house, living room, kitchen, basement. The appliances were top of the line. A wine fridge hummed softly against the back wall of the kitchen. In the basement, a projector was mounted over leather seating, still wrapped in protective plastic. There was a small gym with a sauna. I stood in the center of it all, trying to imagine how long Neil had been planning this. By 2 o'clock, I hadn't eaten, so I made a sandwich in the kitchen with what was in the fridge. The groceries were new, still in paper bags. I sat at the kitchen island, eating slowly, looking out the window at the neighboring homes. This wasn't just a house. It was a life, and I wasn't supposed to be part of it. After lunch, I returned to the office and went over the documents again more carefully this time. In one of the statements, I noticed a transfer $5,000 from an unfamiliar name into Neil's account listed as a referral bonus. There were 3 more like it. Smaller loans, different names. I took more pictures. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I had a feeling it wasn't just about me. Around 5:30, I heard the crunch of tires outside. I moved to the window and looked down. Neil's black sedan pulled into the driveway. I could see him in the driver's seat laughing. Talia sat beside him, holding a small bouquet and a box that looked like it held a bottle of wine. I stepped out into the hallway and waited at the foot of the stairs. I heard the key turn in the front door. They stepped inside, still talking, their voices light. "And maybe next week we can invite the Morgans," Talia said. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw me. The box in her hand hit the floor. Neil froze. He looked right at me, eyes wide. "Mom," he said slowly. What are you doing here?" I didn't move. "Isn't it obvious?" Talia looked from me to Neil. "What's going on? What is she talking about?" I stepped aside and motioned toward the room behind me. "Why don't you invite me in?" I said calmly. "Technically, I own the place." Neil tried to speak. It's not what you think." "Really?" "I think you took out a mortgage in my name. I think you forged my signature. I think you used my documents without my permission and bought a house you couldn't afford." Talia stepped back. "Is that true?" she asked, turning to him. "You said your mother agreed to everything." He didn't answer. "You said she signed the papers herself. You said she wanted to help." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I was going to pay it off myself. You wouldn't even have known." "But if you didn't," I asked, "what then?" "The bank takes my apartment, my credit, my name." Talia looked stunned. I thought she was helping us. I didn't know any of this. Neil tried to explain. "My credit's bad. I couldn't qualify on my own. I just needed a way to get approved." Talia dropped the flowers. "You lied to me. You said we could afford this because of your bonuses." "I do get bonuses," he said. "From work. for what I asked. Approving fraudulent loans. How many people's names did you use, Neil? He didn't answer. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. I've documented everything, every forgery, every stolen number. I could go to the police. His voice cracked. You wouldn't. You weren't worried about me when you did all this. Talia stepped between us. What's going to happen now? I looked at both of them. That depends on what you do next, and how honest you're willing to be. Neil didn't speak. He sat down heavily at the table, hands in his hair. Talia backed toward the stairs. We stayed there in silence for a long time. Outside, the sky was starting to darken. Clouds rolled in low and slow across Phoenix City. The air felt heavy, like everything around us was waiting. I didn't know what they would choose, but I knew one thing. I wasn't leaving until the truth was spoken aloud. That night, I stayed in the guest room at the back of the house. I hadn't planned to, but Neil suggested it, and I agreed. Driving home didn't feel wise. I needed rest, and more than that, I needed quiet. The room was clean and spare, with white linens and a small framed photo of a beach I'd never visited. I lay there for hours staring at the ceiling fan. I didn't sleep. In the morning, we gathered at the long dining table. No one spoke at first. The coffee was hot, the sky outside still gray. Talia sat at one end, hands folded. Neil stared down into his mug. Across the table, I sat with the folder of evidence on my lap. Finally, I set down my cup. We need to decide how to move forward, I said. There are two options. I go to the police, or we find another way. Neil didn't look up. His voice was low. Please, Mom, don't go to the police. It'll ruin everything. Explain how you plan to fix this, I said. I'll make the payments, he answered quickly. I'll pay back the loan. You won't have to do anything. And if you lose your job? I asked. If you fall behind? What then? I don't want promises, Neil. I want a solution. He didn't reply. Talia cleared her throat. I still can't believe you did this, she said, turning toward him. You told me your mother had agreed to everything. You told me this was her idea. I was going to tell you, Neil muttered, still not meeting her eyes, when she asked. After the bank took her apartment, after her credit was destroyed. No one's credit is being destroyed, he said sharply. I had it under control. You never had anything under control, she snapped. You lied to me. You lied to your own mother. You forged her name and used her retirement to fund this fantasy. His face flushed, but he stayed silent. I leaned forward. How many other loans, Neil? He looked at me. Just this one, he said. I waited. Small ones before he added. People who didn't notice. I paid them back right away. Whose names? He shook his head. Just older clients. The ones who didn't check their accounts. Talia covered her mouth with her hand. I sat back. So it wasn't just me. I wasn't stealing, he said defensively. I was trying to build something. With fraud, I said softly. You used the people you were supposed to protect. And you did it because it was easy. His voice rose. It's not just me. You think I'm the only one at that bank doing this? Everyone's got tricks. Some just don't get caught. That's not an excuse, Talia said. That's cowardice. He turned toward her. You didn't ask where the money came from when we bought the TV, or the new furniture, or your necklace. You said it was a bonus, she snapped. You said it was earned. They were both standing now facing each other. The tension in the room was thick. I watched hands folded, letting it run its course. Enough, I said. They turned toward me. Sit down, both of you. They sat. I looked at my son. What you did is a crime. Forgery, identity theft, fraud, and more than that, you betrayed people's trust. He didn't argue. But I don't want to see you in prison, I said. Not because you don't deserve it, but because I don't think that's what will change you. He looked up. What does that mean? It means I'll give you one chance. But there are conditions. He nodded slowly. First, I said, this house is being sold. Immediately. The loan paid off in full, all of it. We'll lose money, he said. You already did. He didn't answer. Second, you resign from the bank today. His eyes widened. But how will I? You'll find another job, I said. An honest one. Something you can look at without shame. He slumped in his chair. Third, you go to the bank's management and tell them everything. The truth. Every detail. You return the funds you took. You cooperate. Fully. He covered his face with his hands. If you don't, I added, I'll take all of this straight to the police, and I won't hold back. The room was silent again. Outside, the rain had started soft at first, tapping the windows like it didn't want to interrupt. Talia spoke. Ruth is right, she said. This is the only way forward. Neil looked up. Are you against me now, too? I'm against what you did, she said. You didn't just break the law. You broke us. He hunched over elbows on the table. I'll do it, he said at last. I'll sell the house, quit the job, tell the truth. And the money I asked. What you haven't paid back, I spent it. He said quietly. On the house, the furniture, the car. Then you'll sell the car. Sell everything. Whatever's left, you'll repay over time. He didn't protest. I stood. I'll call Terry Niblock. He'll arrange a meeting with the bank. Neil's head snapped up. Terry knows I spoke to him before I came here, I said. He showed me the loan documents. He suspected something for a while. Neil closed his eyes. You planned this. I planned to find the truth. I stepped into the hallway and dialed Terry's number. He picked up on the third ring. Mrs. Ellison, I have news, I said. I explained the confession, the decision to repay the loan, the promise to resign. That's very good to hear, he said. I'll set a meeting for 2 o'clock this afternoon. The director and legal team will be there. Thank you, Terry. One more thing, he said. If the bank learns the fraud is deeper than what's admitted, they'll still go to law enforcement. I understand. I turned back toward Neil and Talia. 2 o'clock, I said. We're going together. Why, Neil asked. To make sure you follow through, I said. And because no matter what happens, you're still my son. He didn't speak, but I saw it, the crack in his voice, the blink that came too fast. He looked down. I'll go too, Talia said. I want to know everything. Neil nodded slowly. We started to gather our things, coats, folders, keys. Talia moved through the house with practiced hands gathering papers off the table, wiping down the counter. I took one last look around the tall ceilings, the wide windows, the life they'd tried to build from someone else's name. As we stepped outside, the rain had slowed to a light mist. The driveway shimmered. The air smelled like wet concrete and something older, like change coming. None of us spoke on the way to the car, but we all knew what the next few hours would bring. The meeting room smelled faintly of pine cleaner and printer toner, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed in 20 years. A long rectangular table sat beneath buzzing ceiling lights. At the far end, a clock ticked just loud enough to be noticed. We sat on one side, Neil, Talia, and me. Across from us were 2 bank officers and Terry Niblock. He gave me a short nod as we settled in. Neil held the folder of documents in both hands, his shoulders hunched. He hadn't said much in the car. Talia sat stiff beside him, fingers twisting the strap of her purse over and over. I watched the way she glanced around the room, her eyes pausing on the framed certificate hanging above the whiteboard on the chipped corner of the table. She hadn't known what today would hold. None of us really had. Terry cleared his throat. Thanks for coming in today, everyone. This is a voluntary meeting. What you share will be noted, but we're not here to decide consequences. We're here to understand what happened. Neil nodded once. His voice came out low. I forged the loan documents for the Halley Street property using my mother's name. He opened the folder and slid the top page forward. This is the deed. I signed it myself. That's not her signature. The woman to Terry's left picked up the page. She was middle-aged with salt and pepper hair and a thin gold bracelet on her wrist. And these other accounts? She asked. We flagged 4 more loans with your personal employee code, all opened within the last 18 months. Neil's jaw tightened. They're mine. I pushed them through with forged documents. Some I paid off. Others I covered with bonuses or temporary income from commissions. You falsified the income reports. Yes. Terry leaned forward slightly. Were any of the clients aware? Number I used names from old files. Some of them were from inactive accounts. One was a client who'd passed away. I saw the way the room changed after that. The woman to Terry's left stopped writing. The man at the end of the table folded his arms and leaned back. No one said anything for a moment. I understand the weight of what I did, Neil said. I'm resigning today. I've already drafted the letter. I've contacted a real estate agent to start the process of selling the house. The woman spoke again. Your employment will be terminated effective immediately. Our legal team will evaluate next steps. You understand this could still be referred to law enforcement? Yes. Terry nodded. We'll review the documents you've provided. You've been cooperative. That may help. I'll pay back what I owe, Neil added. Every dollar. Talia glanced at me, then back at him. Including what we spent. He turned to her. Yes. When the meeting ended, we stood slowly. Terry walked us to the elevator. Thank you for coming forward, he said quietly, looking at me. I know this wasn't easy. It wasn't about ease, I said. It was about what's right. Back in the car, the silence returned. Neil drove this time. Talia sat in the passenger seat. I sat behind them, hands in my lap. The sky was still overcast, and the streets looked slick from the earlier rain. We passed a row of townhomes, a shuttered bakery, a corner playground where a little boy in a red jacket was climbing up a slide the wrong way. Neil spoke without turning around. I'm sorry. I didn't answer. Not right away. When we reached the house, Talia said she was going for a walk. She stepped out and pulled her coat tight against the wind. I followed Neil inside. He sat at the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees. I'll start packing tomorrow, he said. We'll list the house by next week. I nodded. Good. You'll get your apartment back. We'll transfer the deed back to your name. The lease agreement will be voided. There's one more thing, I said. He looked at me. You'll write letters to the people whose names you used. If they're alive, they deserve an apology. If not, their families do. He looked down. Okay, and I'll be there when you send them. All right. The rest of the day passed slowly. We didn't speak much. I helped Talia box up dishes in the kitchen. She was quiet but not cold. Just tired. We worked side by side until the sun set. She made soup for dinner, and we ate it in the living room with the lights dimmed low. Neil stayed in the office most of the night. Before I went to bed, I stepped outside onto the back porch. The air smelled like damp earth and pine mulch. I stood there, arms crossed, listening to the faint sound of traffic beyond the trees. Somewhere deep in the distance, I heard a train horn. It reminded me of when Neil was a boy, how he used to listen for that same sound from his bedroom window. How he'd ask if the trains ever stopped in our town. I stayed outside until the chill crept into my bones. Inside, I passed the office. The light was still on. Neil was at the desk writing. A small stack of envelopes sat beside him. I didn't speak, just kept walking. In the guest room, I turned off the lamp and lay down. The mattress was too soft, the pillows too tall. Still, I closed my eyes. There was still more to come, but for the first time in a long while, I felt something shift. We weren't out of the woods, but we'd stopped pretending we were. The paperwork for the house transfer went through faster than I expected. By the second week of January, my name was back on the deed. Neil signed over full rights without hesitation. He'd moved out by then into a small rental across town, near the bus depot. Talia stayed behind a few more days to finish packing, then followed him. She didn't say goodbye, just left her key on the counter and closed the door behind her. I had the apartment back, but it didn't feel like mine yet. The kitchen still smelled faintly of her shampoo. The guest room held the indentation of a suitcase on the mattress. A single coffee mug with a chipped rim sat in the sink. I washed it slowly and set it back in the cabinet where it belonged. Neil called once or twice that week. Short calls, mostly to update me on his job search or ask if I'd received the notarized bank letters. He didn't ask how I was doing, and I didn't offer. There wasn't room for small talk yet, not with everything still fresh in the air. By the end of the month, I received a notice from a regional law firm. A class action had been filed against the bank where Neil used to work. It wasn't about him not directly, but about broader misconduct across several branches involving forged documents and fraudulent loans. His name was mentioned once under a sealed investigation file. I set the notice aside, unsure what to feel. Then a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. The envelope was cream-colored, the edges worn slightly from handling. Inside was a short note from a woman named Elsie Davenport. She'd been one of the names on the list Neil admitted to using. She wrote that her husband had passed 3 years ago and that their accounts had been dormant since. She thanked me for the apology Neil had sent and said she appreciated the effort even if the pain couldn't be undone. She ended the letter with a single line, "We all have to decide how to carry what others leave behind." I kept the letter in a drawer with the rest of the documents. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because it didn't accuse or excuse, just acknowledged. One morning in early February, I walked to the corner market. It was colder than usual, and the wind cut straight through my coat. I stopped at the newspaper stand on the way back, drawn by a headline on the bottom half of the front page, "Former Loan Officer Cooperates in Fraud Probe." There was a picture of Neil younger than he looked now, standing in front of the bank. The article didn't mention our family. It talked about cooperation restitution sealed statements. But I knew what was between the lines. That afternoon, I received a call from Terry Niblock. He asked if I'd be willing to meet again. Not at the bank this time, at a conference room the legal team had rented downtown. He said there was something I needed to hear. When I arrived, the room was smaller than the last one. A long oval table, 3 chairs. Terry was there, along with a woman in a gray suit, who introduced herself as Rachel Quinn, part of the Internal Audit Division. She placed a folder on the table between us. "What we're going to show you," she said, "was uncovered during Neil's cooperation interviews. He agreed we could share it with you." She opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of documents, some I recognized, some I didn't. Bank statements, client files, time-stamped emails. Near the back was a handwritten note. It was dated nearly 2 years earlier. The handwriting was Neil's. Rachel read aloud, "If anything happens, or if I don't come forward, I need it known that I did not act alone. I was advised by regional management to push high-interest loan bundles through under ghost accounts. The incentive structure made it nearly impossible to meet targets otherwise. I take responsibility, but I was not the only one. She looked up. This letter was written before your name was ever used. Before the Halley Street purchase. Before the forgery. Terry leaned forward. It appears Neil got caught in something much larger. He made choices, bad ones. But the pressure, the structure, it wasn't isolated. I sat still. The room felt too quiet, the hum of the heating vent louder than it should have been. We can't erase what happened, Rachel said. But his statement has opened a larger inquiry. The bank is settling with several families. You'll receive restitution for the unauthorized transactions. And we thought you deserved to know the full scope. Outside, the wind had picked up again. I walked to the bus stop, the folder tucked tightly under my arm. I didn't open it again right away. Just sat on the bench and watched a man walk past with his dog, the leash slack between them. That evening, Neil called. I didn't pick up the first time. Let it go to voicemail. When he rang again, I answered. They told me they met with you, he said. I didn't want it to be a surprise. I read the letter I said. I wanted it on the record. I don't know what happens next, but at least that part's out there now. We didn't talk long, just enough to say what had to be said. After we hung up, I stood in the middle of my living room. The furniture was all in place just as I'd left it. The silence didn't feel as heavy as it had weeks ago. Something had shifted, not fixed, not resolved, but no longer hidden. The house was quiet, but not empty. The first check came in mid-March. It arrived by courier, sealed in a stiff white envelope with 2 signatures on the front. Inside was a letter from the settlement division and a cashier's check from the bank's restitution fund. The amount was more than I expected. Not enough to change my life entirely, but enough to cover the damages, legal fees, and a portion of what Neil had used without consent. I held the check for a while before depositing it, walked it to the bank in person, handed it to a young woman behind the counter, and watched her stamp it like any other deposit. She didn't know the history, didn't ask any questions, just thanked me politely and wished me a good afternoon. Later that week, Rachel Quinn called to say the internal report was now closed. Neil had signed a full cooperation agreement. He wouldn't serve time, but he'd lose all licensure and would be monitored by a financial ethics board. Several managers from his former district were placed under investigation, and the regional VP quietly stepped down. Rachel asked if I had any questions. I didn't, just thanked her and said I appreciated her honesty throughout. The following Sunday, I drove to the other side of town. Neil had mentioned a new job at a small accounting office near the river. I parked a few blocks away and walked until I found it a narrow storefront with gold lettering on the glass door. His name wasn't listed anywhere, just Benson and Thorne Financial Advisors. I didn't go in, just stood across the street for a minute. The lights were on. Someone inside was moving papers at a desk. Could have been Neil, could have been someone else. I turned back and walked to my car. That night, I found a voicemail from him. He said he'd heard the final checks had been issued, that he hoped things were settling down for me. He paused for a long time before adding, "If there's anything you ever want to say, or if you just want to tell me off properly, you know how to reach me." I didn't call back. The next morning, I cleaned out the last of the storage closet in the hallway. I found the welcome mat from our old place and an unopened box of holiday lights. At the bottom was a small photo album I hadn't seen in years, pictures from the early days. One of Neil and me at the beach, both of us laughing, hair windblown and wet. Another of us in the kitchen, flour on our hands, the counter cluttered with pie tins. I looked through the photos slowly. Some I kept. Others I set aside. Later that week, I stopped by the community center. Miss Caroline, the director, greeted me with a warm smile and asked how things were going. I told her I was thinking of coming back on a part-time basis, maybe helping with the outreach program again. She said I'd always be welcome. "You were good with the seniors," she said. "You listened. That's something not everyone knows how to do." It was early evening by the time I got home. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the last of the daylight slip behind the trees. The apartment was quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. That weekend, Talia stopped by. She knocked, instead of using a key, which I appreciated. She looked different, older somehow, even though it had only been a few months. "I'm not here to argue," she said. "Just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I wasn't fair to you. I didn't see it at the time, but I know it now." I didn't say anything right away. Just moved aside so she could come in. We sat in the kitchen. I poured her a cup of tea. She told me she'd moved in with a friend temporarily, that she was thinking of applying to grad school out of state, that she'd been working at a coffee shop to save up. "You don't have to forgive me," she said quietly. I just needed to say it out loud. I nodded. "I hear you." We didn't talk much after that. She left not long after, said she'd call if she got accepted anywhere. I watched her walk down the sidewalk, her coat buttoned tight against the wind. That night, I pulled out a new notebook and started writing again. Not about Neil or the house or the past year, but about the little things. The garden I wanted to start, a recipe I'd meant to try, a list of books I hadn't read yet. The kind of life that wasn't built around cleaning up someone else's mess. Just mine. Quiet, steady, real. The first crocuses pushed through the soil in early March. I noticed them one morning as I stepped outside with my tea, tiny bursts of purple edging the walkway. It had been a mild winter, but still the sight stopped me. I stood there a while, steam rising from the mug in my hands, listening to the quiet. The air still held a chill, but it was softer now. Not sharp, just enough to remind you that things change whether you're ready or not. I'd started working a few afternoons a week at the community center again, mostly helping with seniors' paperwork, rides to appointments, little things like that. It gave my days structure, and I liked the way Miss Caroline ran things, steady, no fuss. Some of the women I helped reminded me of my mother. Others reminded me of who I might have become if I'd stayed in that old house, keeping up appearances, pretending things were fine. One afternoon, I stopped by the bakery near the post office. The girl behind the counter had just taken a tray of rolls from the oven, and the whole shop smelled like warm butter and flour. I ordered 2 thinking I'd freeze one for later, but I ate both by the time I got home. That night, I slept with the window cracked open and dreamed of a garden I hadn't planted yet. A few weeks later, I ran into Darren outside the grocery store. He looked thinner than I remembered, his jacket a little loose at the shoulders. He said he was doing contract work again, mostly out of state. We talked for a minute or two, surface things, weather work, gas prices. Then he asked if I'd ever heard from Neil. "No," I said. "Not in a while." He nodded, looked down at his shoes, then back at me. "You always saw things clearer than I did." I didn't answer, just told him to take care. Later, I thought about how many years I'd spent trying to explain, trying to make people understand what they didn't want to see, and how quiet the world became once I stopped trying. In April, I finally painted the back room, a soft green, the color of fresh leaves. I moved the sewing machine near the window and brought in a small radio from the thrift store. It crackled a little on certain stations, but I didn't mind. I liked the way the light moved across the walls throughout the day, gentle, unhurried. That room became my favorite place to sit with a book or just listen to the wind in the trees outside. By early summer, I'd planted a few things in pots along the porch, basil tomatoes, some marigolds. Nothing fancy, just enough to watch something grow again. The neighbor's dog liked to sleep in the sun nearby, tail twitching now and then. I'd started leaving a bowl of water out for him. One morning, I found a letter in the mailbox. No return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a note from Neil. Short, no excuses, no asking for anything, just a line that said he hoped I was well and that he'd always remembered the way I used to hum when I cooked. I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer by the phone. I didn't feel angry or sad, just still, like I'd finally stepped out of a long hallway and into open air. Looking back, I don't think justice always shows up in courtrooms or checks with names on them. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's just the freedom to live your days without waiting for someone else's version of peace. I still keep a notebook on the table by the window. Some days I write lists. Other days, memories. And once in a while, a single sentence is enough. A soft reminder that even after the storm clears, the world keeps turning slow, steady, and new. If you're still here, thank you for listening. I hope wherever you are, you found your own kind of quiet too. And if this story made you think of something from your life, feel free to share it in the comments. I'd love to hear it.